everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to pitch some fantasy at my friend Charles.
I am ready to be pitched at today, Dylan, but you know, we've got a lot of, I don't even know what to do. My brain's crossed because I was going to say we don't, but not just any fantasy, but not just any pitches today, because today we bring back the beloved FTF classic, Friends Pitching Fantasy. Woo. Yes, it's very exciting. The energy in the room is electrifying because, you know, one of the things that we always have to keep in mind for a show such as this one about fantasy series is what book are we going to read next? And there's always that discussion, and it's like, why not have that discussion on the air? And why not, like, make it into a little bit of fun? And so that's what we're going to do over this week. It's Friends Pitching Fantasy Week yet again. We're going to start with Dylan pitching 3 books that he wants to read next on the show. And then on Wednesday, I will pitch 3 books that I want to read on the show. We're going to open up some polls on the socials where you can vote on each of our pitches to see kind of which one you'd want us to read next. I'm going to pick one of Dylan's that he's pitching today. Dylan's going to pitch one of mine that I'm going to be reading, pitching on Wednesday. And then we'll decide on Friday after all the results from social media come in. And, you know, we'll use those to weigh our decision. And those will be the next 2 books that we read on the show. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That's exactly right, Charles. And should be dropping this one probably on a Monday, I assume.
Hopefully.
That's when folks are listening. Then Wednesday of the same week, we'll have Charles pitching those 3 books at me, but we won't decide until we've had the time to send out polls to all of you awesome folks. And then Friday of that week will probably be when we have decided which 2 books. And you know what, Charles? This will be an interesting one. Ooh. Because, well, you don't know. You don't know what 3
I have no idea.
I picked. You have no idea. Like, absolutely.
No clue.
Like, I mean, you sent me like a list of 10 books or something, and you're like, I'm thinking of pitching 3 of these. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, great. But I've sent you nothing, Charles. You have no idea what I'm coming in with.
Even today, I'm like, is Dylan ready to record today? Like, I haven't heard anything. He hasn't shared anything with me. Usually we're like debating which books to pick so we can narrow it down. And it's usually there's a bit of a discussion before we come on the air. But this is the first Friends Pitching Fantasy where we've just kind of, you know, gone off on our own and come into this totally unbiased. It's going to be interesting because usually I kind of know what's coming and can expect it, but I honestly have no idea what books you're pitching today, and I don't even have a guess.
I think this harkens back to the old days of Friends Pitching Fantasy, right? I think we used to surprise each other in that way.
I think so. We'd have to go back. But no, it's very exciting, and I don't want to wait too much longer, man. You know, I'm very excited to dig into some new fantasy. We've read a lot. We read the Robin Hobb trilogy, and that was fantastic. And then we've read a couple books in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I'm ready for something new, man. I'm excited to see what you bring to the table.
I'm excited to bring these books to the table, Charles.
Bring them.
The pitching
now, do we say
table.
All 3 at front.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, that's what we've traditionally done.
Yeah. Totally.
I guess the only reason not to would be to surprise you in each instance. But you know what? I think this listener experience will be better if they know what 3 books they're in.
Yeah, and they'll probably be in the title image too anyway, and in the description and all that. So they're going to know.
All right. Well, Charles, book 1 will be Blackwing by Ed McDonald. That is... Yeah, the first book of the Raven's Mark trilogy, and I brought that up a few times on the show before. And then the next book is Fourth Wing by New York Times best-selling author Rebecca
If I
Yarros.
was going to guess one, I would have picked that one that you were going to guess. That would have been my guess.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I should have said something because I was like, you know what? Like, if someone actually at my office, because people know about the show where I work, and one of my coworkers came up to me. We don't work in the same department, so she had to come out of her way to come up to me and then was like, "So have you read The Fourth Wing yet?" And I was like, no, I haven't. Yeah, because I was talking to her about how I was reading Court of Thorns and Roses, and so she's like, oh, it's a similar vibe, like a new adult romance. And I was like, oh, I'm sure Dylan is aware of this and already has it in his crosshairs. So it's kind of funny. That conversation happened Thursday, so just yesterday, 2 days ago. Yeah. And I almost like when someone recommends stuff to me, I try and move it up the priority list. So I almost pitched it today. I almost threw a curveball at you. And then I decided not to at the last minute. And I was like, there's a good chance Dylan might pick it and we'll both pitch it. And that would be kind of awkward.
That's why we tell each other beforehand, isn't it?
Yeah. But we didn't have to because I didn't do it. I almost did.
Oh, that would have been disaster. Complete disaster.
I know, then you got to play the game. It was like, do I waste my pick on it or do I assume he's going to pick it and then I get to pick a different one? You know, like that kind of...
Prisoner's dilemma.
Yes, Prisoner's Dilemma, sort of. Classic. Fantastic.
They call it the Dragon Rider's Dilemma when it's Fourth Wing, though. Mm-hmm. And I will say that this new adult romantasy subgenre has definitely been more prevalent in my life since I got into a relationship with a fellow fantasy reader, and she's on top of that.
For sure. The influence of the like new adult romance, more like, I for sure. It's fun. Yeah. It's fun. It's different. So, I'm curious.
Books for everyone, but they definitely target women more with how they present themselves. But for sure, of course, books that we can enjoy as well, Charles, and folks of any gender, and that's why I brought it today. And I'll also go on to what?
I don't know
Charles,
what I did.
What just happened on the Zoom
call? I just gave a thumbs up and it shot fireworks.
Yeah. What? Is this like a new function?
I've never seen this in my life.
Just to explain to the listeners. Oh, and when you put thumbs down, it rains?
I guess.
Okay, just to explain to listeners, something just happened on Zoom that we were completely unprepared for and have never seen before. Charles gave 2 thumbs ups, and the Zoom background just started shooting off fireworks. It does it every time he does it. And then if Charles gave 2 thumbs down, it starts to rain in his Zoom, like the Zoom background changes.
Now what happens if I flip you off? That's the real question.
Nothing happens except our friendship has been damaged. You made a vulgar gesture at me, Charles.
I did make a vulgar gesture,
as Sarah J. Maas would say. Yeah, definitely a vulgar gesture.
Nothing. Well, I'll keep trying throughout the episode, see if I can get a response from Zoom on the middle finger. But until then, Dylan, you have a third pick that I'm dying to know what it is to complete your selection.
Yeah, my third
and is it wing related?
I know. I did have 2 wing related books. I just noticed when I was telling you those 2, but unfortunately, this has little to no wings.
I thought you were a professional. I thought you were a professional.
Wouldn't that be great if I had like a whole
even if it was a bird thing, even if it wasn't necessarily wing, I would have been like, okay, this guy gets it.
So like a bird without wings? What?
No, like if what the title was something like, oh, the ravens something, or oh, the crows something, like.
I mean,
even if it was
like
bird
Blackwing, which is Raven's Mark trilogy. But anyway, moving on, Charles, we're going to be talking about the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan, beginning with Promise of Blood. Yes, I thought this would be a good one. This is one of those books that's like why haven't we read this on the show yet? It's kind of fallen into that category, which are always
it's
good
been
ones
on my
to bring to
TBR
friends
for
pitching
about
fantasy.
1,000 years.
Decade.
So
I don't know if it's been out a decade, but still a long time. And yeah, so I'm pitching the whole trilogy for that. While with the other two, I'm going to be pitching the first book with potential to keep going. I think the second book is not out for Fourth Wing yet, but then the whole trilogy is out for Blackwing. So that's what we're dealing with today, Charles. I guess we've kind of got your reactions to these already, and I think I'll just dive into the pitches if you're ready for that.
I'm ready. I'm assuming you're going in order that you unveiled them?
I'm a professional, Charles, of course.
Of course. All right. Let's hear Blackwing.
Blackwing by Ed McDonald. Charles, I'm going to start, like I always do, with kind of the back of the book. Just to
smart.
ground people in what kind of book we're dealing with here.
Okay.
Set on the ragged edge of a post-apocalyptic frontier, Blackwing is a gritty fantasy debut about a man's desperate battle to survive his own dark destiny. Under its cracked and wailing sky, the misery is a vast and blighted expanse, the arcane remnant of a devastating war with the immortals, known as the Deep Kings. The war ended nearly a century ago, and the enemy is kept at bay only by the existence of the Engine, a terrible weapon that protects the misery's border. Across the corrupted no-man's land, teeming with twisted magic and malevolent wraiths, the Deep Kings and their armies bide their time, watching, waiting. Bounty hunter Ryhalt Galharrow has breathed misery dust for 20 bitter years. When he's ordered to locate a masked noblewoman at a frontier outpost, he finds himself caught in the middle of an attack by the Deep Kings, one that signifies they may no longer fear the Engine. Only a formidable show of power from the very woman he is seeking, Lady Elizabeth Tanza, repels the assault. Elizabeth is a shadow from Galharrow's grim past, and together they stumble onto a web of conspiracy that threatens to end the fragile peace the Engine has provided. Galharrow is not ready for the truth about the blood he's spilled or the gods he's supposed to serve. Now that's a back of the book. Am I right?
Wow, that's a back of the book for sure.
Right. Sometimes, you read them and they're very like, summary, like, get an idea what it's about. That one, that was like good prose in that one.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
All right. I brought up this book a few times, like I mentioned before, and it's usually under the context of underrated grimdark fantasy that has a great sense of humor. And obviously that sounds right up our alley. So I thought time finally pitch this to you. As a heads up, like I said, first book in the trilogy, but just pitching this one right now. Happy to continue with the series if we want to after reading it. It is a great series overall, but you are not locking yourself in by picking this one. Let's start with some of the stats. Has a 4.1 out of 5 stars with just under 7,000 ratings on Goodreads. Among those ratings, we have 5-star reviews from a few of our friends, and those being incredible authors, Mark Lawrence and Nicholas Eames, both of which Mark Lawrence of many books fames, but let's say Prince of Thorns, Red Sister, and so on. Nicholas Eames, Kings of the Wild author, a fantastic guy, and both people we've had the opportunity to meet, chat with. Also reviewers like Ed Gwynn of the Brothers Gwynn, as well as a bunch of other great reviewers, Peter Swordsmith, Nick Borelli, we're buddies with. So
I see Robin Hobb on here too, which we just read.
I mean, I think I have a Robin Hobb quote, or at least a mention somewhere in my pitches. So
fantastic.
All right, Charles. Obviously, that's a lot of good people put in 5-star reviews, and a lot of people whose tastes align well with ours, and of course, whose opinions we respect tremendously. I'll read a little excerpt from Ed Gwynn's review. He called it a story with good world building, solid characters, and a breakneck pace. Blackwing is a strong fantasy book that is full of unique twists and themes. He goes on to say, read it, Charles. Nicholas Eames said, Blackwing is, simply put, awesome. It's gritty, edgy, suspenseful, and often poignant. The world is unique, the characters are deeply flawed, see also real human beings, and the pacing is breakneck from the first page to the last. And we want to see Mark praise the magic, intrigue, and writing, while going on to say he can see why Blackwing has been one of the more successful fantasy debuts of 2017. And, okay, clear our friends love this book, but Charles, it's important that I tell you why I love this book and why you'll love this book. That's what Friends Pitching Fantasy is all about.
That's
and for
what
me,
it's all about.
it starts with the good old morally gray complex protagonist. I know I've been calling that buzzwordy and all that kind of stuff, but it holds true when it comes to Reinhold Galharrow. And the story is written in first person from his point of view. And in that way, it is just oozing with voice. The character has got this cynical, clever, dark sense of humor. And Charles, when I think cynical, clever, and dark sense of humor, I think you, Charles. And
Oh, well, there you go.
yeah.
I'll take it.
His whole, yeah. At least two of those are, well, at least one of those are nice. Clever?
It's an interesting combination. I'll take it.
Yeah. It's not, it's not entirely off. And his whole way, Reinhold's whole way, not yours, Charles, of seeing the world, it's this kind of self-awareness coupled with a sense of having seen it all and made every mistake imaginable already. And it provides this unique perspective that fits the story so well. And that way it's kind of along the lines, very different book, but along the lines of, let's say, like a Kingkiller Chronicle type book where the character is providing the voice and it's very unique and you couldn't imagine the story coming from like another perspective. It's a unique experience reading from Reinhold's point of view and one that I know aligns well with your taste when it comes to that dark sense of humor, cynicism, all that kind of stuff. Very witty. It's super fast-paced. You've heard that from some of the earlier reviews I mentioned. The paperback copy that I have is only 360 pages long. And no puns intended, it just flies by.
Nice.
Yeah.
There he is.
I read at night before bed. That's kind of part of the wind-down routine. And sometimes, Charles, I have these books that rather than helping me get to sleep, help me wind down, they have such awesome pacing and so much intrigue that then it has the counter effect, Charles. It keeps me up. And then I have to be like, all right, I need to read this book. Other times, and I pick a different book to wind down with. Or, sometimes I stay up all night and read. But this falls into the category of keeps me up book. And for better or worse, that was my experience reading this one. And it's a ton of fun, and it's going to keep you wrapped into the story. It's got intrigue, action, and a twisted, interesting, magic-infused world with this idea of the misery. It feels almost like this magical nuclear wasteland, like a little bit of Hills Have Eyes-y kind of feel to it that I felt, whereas like these distorted monsters and wicked beings that are all messed up from being in the misery. And it's almost surreal at times. And it's, very unique. I've not read anything that has anything quite like the misery. And McDonald's writing makes you feel like you're right there in the thick of things, breathing misery dust like bounty hunter Reinhold Galharrow. And it's... I'd be remiss, I'd say, not to note the clear appeal that this book has to Abercrombie fans. And when I was describing all of that earlier, the grimdark, the great sense of humor, the wittiness, the cynicism, right? Charles, I know you were thinking Abercrombie. How could you not? Because we're such huge fans of his work.
I was. I'll admit it. I was.
Yeah. Thank you. You're a big man for doing that, Charles. I've
very
mentioned
brave.
this before that that the grimdark sense of humor thing, great fit for first law books, but I'm far from alone. And we know Patrick Leo, prolific reviewer and booktuber. He basically reviewed any fantasy book you can find on Goodreads. You'll see his among the top ones. In his review, he said, "I'm calling every fan of Joe Abercrombie and Mark Lawrence to put Blackwing on their radar." Blackwing, the debut work and the first book in the Raven's Mark series, is one of the most original grimdark fantasies I've read so far. And that's someone who has read a lot of books, Charles, to call it that unique and original. And come on, Charles, calling every fan of Joe Abercrombie and Mark Lawrence might as well have rung you up personally over there.
Yeah, I know. Seriously. It's very impressive. Like the company that the praise has for this book is kept is like really interesting and really spot on for sure.
Oh, Charles, not just that company, but also Django Wexler, author of The Guns of Empire, noted that fans of Glenn Cook's Black Company or Joe Abercrombie's First Law series will be very happy with this one. And Charles, you're a fan of both of those series, so I have one question for you. Don't you want to be happy?
The answer is yes, I really do want to be happy, and it's just always looking for that next book that will finally deliver, But fantastic pitch. And I know this series from all of our recommendation series. Anytime there was like a grimdark thing or an action-oriented thing, Blackwing always made its way into the recommendations, whether it was from you or from people weighing in with their book recommendations. So this one has been around for a while for me. I've always been aware of it, never pulled the trigger and picked it up. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think sometimes when you've read a book and I haven't, or vice versa, and we're reading for the show, it's easy for those kind of books to get shelved, for lack of a better word, because it's like, well, one of us has already read it, so we've got it covered, and let's keep moving. So to pitch it is very interesting. And certainly the mix of the grimdark and the humor and the uniqueness of the misery is all very intriguing. I gotta say, the cover is not very good. I think
Charles,
that was another part of why.
Don't judge a book by its cover. How dare you? The cardinal sin.
I would never.
While we're on birds, cardinal sin.
But yeah, it's like it's got the Jack Peterson font and then like the silhouette of a bird, which I've seen in like six. I was at Barnes and Noble the other day, and it's like I think it's like the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in another book with like the exact same cover, and then this is slightly different. It's like I'm over the bird silhouette as a motif for a book cover, but. Putting that aside, putting my bias of the cover aside, everything else about it, all the signs are there that this is something that I would definitely love to read. So very strong first pitch.
Thank you, Charles. I see where you're going with the cover. I think
Thank you.
I mean the whole crow and raven stuff.
I've seen a lot worse.
It's just overdone.
Yeah, it's overplayed.
It's not in a vacuum, if you looked at the cover, you would not say it's a bad cover.
No.
It's just in the context of the greater fantasy genre where you could probably locate 5 or 6 other books within 10 feet of it at a bookstore that have also a silhouette of a raven or bird with a person with a hood.
A cloak, yeah.
A cloak, sorry. Yeah, that's... Yeah, it's not a bad cover, but it's just overdone. But Charles, don't judge a book by that cover, Charles.
I wouldn't. I'm very engaged. I'm very interested.
All right. Well, Charles, we good on Blackwing. We're going to move forward to Fourth Wing here.
Yes, we are good on Blackwing, so...
All right. Well, Blackwing's done. Fourth Wing begins. This is by New York Times bestseller Rebecca Yarros, as I mentioned. we've got 20-year-old Violet Sorengale we got some names here. Ryholt, Galharrow, Violet Sorengale.
Yeah, I see
Do you think
Zayden Ryerson.
Do you think Soren there is a play on soaring? And Gale is a play on like Gale, like winds. Do we think that, Charles?
Think that.
You think so?
I do think that. Mm-hmm.
No.
It has to be, right?
I feel like it is. But anyway, because dragon riding book, like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Either way, Violet Sorengale, 20 years old, supposed to enter the scribe quadrant, living a quiet life among books and history. Who doesn't want that, Charles? But now the commanding general, her tough-as-talons mother, has ordered Violet to join the hundreds of candidates striving to become the elite of Navarre. Dragon riders. But when you're smaller than everyone else and your body is brittle, death is only a heartbeat away. Because dragons don't bond to quote-unquote fragile humans. They incinerate them. With fewer dragons willing to bond than cadets, most would kill Violet to better their own chance of success. She'll need every edge her wits can give her just to see the next sunrise. Yet, with every day that passes, the war outside grows more deadly. The kingdom's protective wards are failing, and Violet begins to suspect leadership is hiding a terrible secret. Friends, enemies, lovers, everyone at Basgiath War College has an agenda. My agenda is trying to figure out how to pronounce that word. Because once you enter, there are only two ways out. What is this, grad school? Am I right? Graduate or die.
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes feels that way in the old PhD program. But
Interesting. I'm curious what it means that she has a fragile body. Does she have glass bones and paper skin? And does she lie awake at night until her heart attacks put her to sleep, or what?
I think she has some disease, and it involves chronic pain and perhaps literally brittle bones. People will praise it for its representation of folks with chronic pain. I've seen that before.
Okay.
All right, Charles. Now into the thick of the pitch. Be honest with you. Haven't read the book, as you probably know. Can't speak as deeply about it as my other two pitches. But Fourth Wing came out May of this year and has already accumulated 580,000 plus ratings on Goodreads, averaging a 4.65. What? Like, are you kidding me?
Very insane.
It is a sensation on TikTok's book talk community, and it's been selling like hotcakes.
Oh yeah.
I figured.
Ooh, nice. I like the I like the old timey language. Appreciate that.
We've been
all these 20-year-old romance novel books, contemporary books, bring out the old timey language.
Right. I believe you said on A Court of Thorns and Roses that you want to know what all the hubbub was about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So these are going like hotcakes, which love that. And I've had people at work coming up to me to talk about it. My thing, though, Dylan, and I know you're mid-pitch, but we're talking about. It seems like this is kind of riding the wave of something like A Court of Thorns and Roses, right? Is this new adult, technically?
I would call it new adult from what I've gathered.
That's the vibe that I get, too.
Yes.
New
adult romantasy, Charles.
Ooh,
like that portmanteau.
I like that.
Romantasy. That's what they're calling it. That's not Del Marsh original. That's what I've seen it called. And in that way, it fits into the kind of Sarah J. Maas style of this massively popular new adult with substantial romance elements to it.
But you add the school element a la like a Harry Potter, and then you add the dragons a la Game of Thrones. You bring those together. Come on. It's the natural.
You got yourself a stew going.
You got yourself a stew going. You put that in some broth. Man. You guys have stew. Absolutely.
I think it's like, it does feel like it was created in a lab to be like the perfect best-selling fantasy book, right? It's taking all of those elements that can attract a really broad crowd, as you're saying. And
but over 500,000 ratings of over 4.6, star average is
in the last 8 months.
You can only formulate so much of theory, but to actually execute something like that is very impressive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Charles, you and I could sit down and say, oh, everyone loves school settings and everyone loves dragons and they love this romance
and Harry Potter and Game of Thrones.
And whatever would come out of our attempt to write a best-selling fantasy novel, we probably wouldn't quite come out of it with over 500,000 ratings with a 4.6 average on Goodreads.
The chances of that happening would be like 1%. It's very low.
Not even, probably infinitesimally small, Charles. But anyway, what's not infinitesimally small, Charles, is, I don't know. I thought I could transition there, but I just didn't have it.
But 99,000
positive
written reviews.
Right, yeah, that's true. Anyway, the way people speak to this book, it seems to have high stakes, fast pace, and a ton of action. The word that I probably most see people describing it as is addictive. And that definitely falls into some of the category with other books that we've been bringing up here, like A Court of Thorns and Roses and stuff. Sounds like it has very modern language. It's extremely accessible, and it's a read that goes by quickly. And of course, huge part of it is going to be that romance element we've been talking about. So, Charles, you did express some reservations there. Maybe you're a little romanticized out after a couple Court of Thorns and Roses books. So I will say you have to be at least somewhat in the mood for that if you're going to pick this one.
The show does not exist to keep you in the good graces of your relationship, Dylan. There's other reasons to read books too.
Yeah, that's true, and that's why I'm putting the ball in your court, Charles. And that way I can always blame you if you don't pick the book that my partner wants me to read. So a big part of the
Does
reason
she want you to read this? Has she read it? I'm kind of interested.
She's not read it, but we both purchased copies of it already. I will say it was a selling like hotcakes situation. Like, we brought both our books up and are like, oh, Fourth Wing, like I've sold 5 of these already today, like something like that. It's people do keep buying it. And well, I'm going to read this at some point and we'll probably read at the same time. But the question is, will it be soon, Charles? And I think a big part of the reason to pick this one up will, of course, be the let's see what all the hype is about factor. And anytime book takes off this much, this quickly, takes off, Charles, takes off.
Takes off. There we go. Yeah.
There's got to be some reason for it. And if nothing else, you and I always enjoy trying to understand that from the perspective of just, all right, what is this thing's role in the fantasy genre? What does it say about trends and where the genre is going and what brings about success, at least success in the way of sales, because this has definitely met that criteria.
What's it going to say about me when Instagram unanimously votes to read this one and then I might not pick it yet, to pick some grimdark thing,
Yeah, we'll see. I think that it's Instagram probably, I would say, leans this way, but it's really TikTok. And we still don't have our TikTok set up quite yet, Charles.
No, we do not.
If we did some sort of poll, if they even have polls on TikTok, I imagine this one would sweep over there. But we don't have them to reach out to. But also, Charles, I gotta say, for you, I've seen comparisons that call this a more adult version of How to Train Your Dragon. And I know you love that movie.
I mean, if it was more adult, that would make it a lot more entertaining too. Throw some romance in there while we're at it, but that's a great
There's
movie.
a little spiciness in here, Charles.
John Powell, fantastic compositions for the score of that movie too. By the way, robbed of the Oscar for best soundtrack for Trent Reznor's stupid Social Network garbage movie, but whatever. I like Trent Reznor, nothing against him, but snub. Anyway, as you were talking about the Fourth Wing, Dragon Riders. I keep wanting to end that with of Pern. Like the word Dragon Rider is so within Anne McCaffrey's like world to me that I hear it in this context and I'm like, okay, got to adjust. It's Dragon Riders for the modern audience, the contemporary audience.
Right. This provides us with an underdog protagonist fighting through a brutal academic setting, but lots of people still describe it as fun and entertaining despite all that brutality. It's got action, it's got romance, it's got adventure, but most importantly, it's got dragons, Charles. When was the last time you read a good book with dragons as a main focus? I think you just answered that. I kind of had it teed up, but you're right. You read Dragon Riders of Pern like not that long ago.
I do love myself a good dragon story. It's true. And they're not as common these days as you might be led to think. Also,
that's the thing. I was just thinking that when I was writing this up, I'm like, oh, okay, dragons again. It's like tons of books have dragons, but how many books are about dragons? It's actually a lot fewer than you might think. And Charles, I think you're due for a book about dragons, and this one would be a great choice.
Interesting. I mean, it's a great pitch. It's a very popular book. It was... people are talking about it to me, expecting me to have read it already. So I feel
they gave you a
obligated.
You said they said, have you read this yet? Like an implication, you will read this at some point. Yes. You have no control over your destiny. So you might.
I also have, and they explained it to me that, it's one of these things where it was written to be almost like a gateway fantasy kind of story too. So when you talked about the like accessibility of it, I think that was part of it. It's kind of like bringing the fantasy elements to their foundation to kind of bring in new readers, which we always love for the fantasy genre, right? So, lots to like and kind of dig into and what that means and see that from an outside perspective. But we just finished reading the second book of Court and Thorns and Roses. Was it Winds of something?
Mist and Fury.
Oh, Mist and Fury.
A Court of
Mist and Fury.
Ruin.
Yeah. So, we just read that, and I was just thinking when we finished that, I was like, I'm done, man. Like, I'm done. But, like, I don't want to become that show where we just read all of these new adult fantasy books all the time. So when you're pitching that Grimdark, I'm like, oh, yeah, let's go back to that, But, hey, maybe the fan response is going to be so strong that I would be crazy not to pick it. And there's still a whole nother book that you have to pitch that I'm actually very familiar with but have never read, where I feel like maybe I have read it. But super excited to get your pitch in for this one.
Definitely, Charles. This one's overdue. And again, this is the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. And begins with Promise of Blood. I'm trying to lock you into the whole trilogy here, Charles. That's the catch. Okay. And I'm primarily going to focus on Promise of Blood as the first one, but I'll get a little bit into the series, just my thoughts.
I'm looking at the series on Goodreads. It makes no sense to me. There's a book 0.0, a book 0.1, then it goes all the way to 1. Then 1.5, then 2, then 3.
No, we're doing 1, 2, 3. We're doing 1, 2, 3, Charles.
Thank you. Okay. I've never seen a crazier numbering system for a series in my entire life.
Don't get involved with that. We're doing 1, we're doing 2, we're doing 3. Maybe I'll look into
here's
1.5.
Book 0.4 to 0.7 plus 1.5. Have you ever seen that in your life? I'm not making this up. I'm texting you this. But keep going.
All right. Well, let's get that back of the book in. The Age of Kings is dead, and I have killed it. It's a bloody business overthrowing a king. Field Marshal Tamis is coup against his king, set corrupt aristocrats to the guillotine, and brought bread to the starving. That was a really hard sentence.
Brought
Can I just
bread
let
to
you
the
know?
starving.
I just had to say coup, aristocrat, guillotine. Like,
Bought bread.
that's a lot.
Untwisted.
There's a lot of
That's
words
good.
that don't sound like how they're spelled. Like, coup doesn't look anything like coup.
Good
was a
thing
lot.
you are a high functioning reader, Dylan. Good thing for that.
I barely made it out of that one. But anyway. But it also provoked war with the Nine Nations, internal attacks by royalist fanatics, and the scramble for money and power by Tamas's supposed allies, the church, workers' unions, and mercenary forces. Stretched to his limit, Tamas is relying on his few remaining powder mages, including the embittered Taniel, a brilliant marksman and Tamlin's estranged son, as well as Adamat, a retired police inspector whose loyalty is being tested by blackmail. But when gods are involved now, as attacks batter them from within and without, the credulous are whispering about the omens of death and destruction. Just old peasant legends about the gods waking to walk the earth. No modern educated man believes that sort of thing. But they should. In a rich, distinctive world that mixes magic with technology, who could stand against mages that control gunpowder and bullets? All right.
Wow.
This is Brian McClellan's debut, and he starts off with a bang. Stats-wise, it's got a 4.14 on Goodreads across 54,000 plus ratings. We're talking about Promise of Blood here. That includes 5-star ratings from Mark Lawrence, Robin Hobb, author of our recently read Farseer trilogy, Will Gwynn of the Brothers Gwynn, David S. from FanFi Addict, and Nils from the Fantasy Hive, a bunch of our friends from Twitter.
Hey, everybody.
From the reviewing community. As you know, but perhaps some listeners do not, McClellan is a protege of Brandon Sanderson's.
Yeah,
having
literally
taken his
from the
class
school of
at
Sanderson,
BYU.
right, in terms of his writing style.
Yes, he is very clearly from the school of Sanderson, not just literally, but figuratively in the way that he writes. You can really tell that all these lessons sunk in, and perhaps that's most prominently seen in the magic system, or systems, if we want to call it that. In some ways, it seems like McClellan has set this up as sort of a hard magic system, reminding folks for Sanderson's rules of magic, going from hard magic to soft magic. Hard magic being the very clear rules, almost you can make a scientific study of it. Soft magic being the more mysterious magic that you don't really want to use to solve your problems in books because people don't understand as well. But a lot of times people refer to it as like Tolkien and stuff. It's like, we don't know what Gandalf can do, but he can do it, Charles. And
Sure can.
that's, yeah. So McClellan kind of used that hard magic and soft magic distinction, and he creates a sort of hard magic versus soft magic war, where many of those on one side are these powder mages who are able to snort this powder, like snort a drug, and that gives them the power to bend bullets telekinetically, and they can also like blow up gunpowder from a distance. Is really cool. I love the magic system in this one. But for the most part, they're facing off against a side that has lots of sorcerers who use more soft magic, old school, often elemental type magic. And you've also got other aspects of magic. There's folks with these certain small specific powers called knacks. Those play a role. Also, fourth kind of magic. There's a bit of a spoiler to get into, but all of these factors combine to create this fun, modern feeling, magic filled story that has a little bit of that meta aspect to it. I don't know how much of that was intentional from McClellan, but just the idea of like hard magic versus soft magic as something to have in a book when you have this larger idea of like, oh, he learned that from Sanderson. The prose also feels pretty Sandersonian in my remembrance, which to me means it's very clear. It's used to serve the story, but there's not a ton of emphasis on creating flourishes or purple prose. But Sanderson talks about prose as trying to make it like a clear window through which you can see the story rather than like something that might cloud things up with too much purple prose. Thing that I remember sticking out most for me when I first read this about 6 years ago, I think, the pacing is the number one thing that I recall. And I remember that plot points would come up that I'd start to think, all right, let's gear up for this being an issue for like 3/4 of the book. Eventually this will get resolved. And then McClellan would find a way to resolve it satisfyingly in just a fraction of the pages. You're like, oh, okay, like we're moving forward. Like you got that done? That was good. Let's see what's next. And I was like, there's things in this book that could drag that never do. And I'm far from alone in feeling this way about Promise of Blood. Mark Lawrence said that McClellan's real forte is in building tension and intrigue, slowly raising the tempo while wrapping the various threads around each other in satisfying ways. The man's a storyteller. And this is a really, you can tell that Mark really loved this one. Because, he's generous. He'll give 5 stars. Sometimes we're like, okay, he liked this book. And he's not looking to like, well, let me bring it down to 4 if he thought it was good. This one I could tell he loved.
He rarely gushes, right? So to read that, you're like, oh, okay, noted.
Right. Yeah. I don't think we've covered any Flintlock fantasy on this podcast yet, Charles. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
I think it's time, so, unless you count Age of Madness. Does that have guns in it?
It does, but like I guess I think of Flintlock
but
fantasy.
It's not Flintlock.
It doesn't. It does have. It does have like very
like Red Country
early. Does Red Country? It's again like cannons, that kind of stuff. The Heroes has some of that, but I think Age of Madness does have actual like guns starting to come about. But
and it's like Industrial Revolution setting, but it's not Flintlock. To your point,
no,
I don't think.
I think of Flintlock fantasy as like the guns are central to the story.
Yeah,
and of course they are in the Powder Mage trilogy. I mean, they're bending bullets for crying out loud, Charles. And I think it's time with this Flintlock fantasy genre that we take a stab, or rather, take a shot on this exciting subgenre. There's no better place to start for that than Promise of Blood. We've got these 3 POVs. That's Adamat, the police inspector I mentioned earlier, Tamlin, the field marshal who entered the Age of Kings, and then
Tamlin, like in Court of Thorns and Roses?
Sorry, Tamas. Freudian.
I was like, Tamlin? His name's Tamlin?
Did I said
Holy smokes.
Sorry. I got Tamlin on the brain. What can I say?
I can't blame you, man. There's some things that you can't unthink about from Court of Thorns and Roses.
No,
but
I'll never unthink about. Sorry. Yeah. the close names, though, give me a little break. Tamas.
They are close.
Tamas versus Tamlin. And then there's Tan Yul. That's the Powder Mage, like the son of Tamas, not Tamlin. Anyway, they're all well fleshed out characters, and they do all have interesting storylines. Only real critique, character-wise, for me, lack of diversity in the POVs. Doesn't have so many strong female characters in this trilogy, but I'm given to understand that changes in his future work, or who knows, maybe in .365, book .365.
Right. Maybe.
Either way. Characters are good. There are, there's some good female characters, but just I don't think any of them are POV. And I think, I do remember coming away being like, could have used a little bit of more like strong female characters. I mean, the same thing with like First Law, the first 3 books. Even Abercrombie himself said like he kind of regrets not not including a little more diversity of POVs. So, just something to keep in mind. But
it's inspired from the early 2000s kind of second renaissance of fantasy, right? And so even though its book is 2013, you said?
Let me take a look so I actually get that right. But go on,
Charles. Oh, April 16th, 2013. It is 2013.
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay. But there's a lot that, like, Brian McClellan's been on my TBR list for a while. He's an author that I just haven't read for whatever particular reason, but, I'm super fascinated by him. Like you said, he came up from the school of Sanderson and was able to do his own thing. But he very much plays in the world of these grimdark, hard magic fantasy authors that we love and want to see more of. The praise from Mark Lawrence puts it, over the top. And Robin Hobb is here, as you had said. And he's also got a pretty fantastic podcast, right? Page Break.
That is true.
Brian McClellan, where he's got a lot of fantastic guests. He hasn't dropped an episode in a while, but the last one he did do had Becky Chambers on it. And so...
Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Great book.
Yeah.
I believe I pitched that, actually. Didn't I pitch that at some... Way back?
We've definitely talked about it. We definitely have recommended it a bunch of times. I think you did pitch it at one point.
I think I did too. Like, we're talking like the second FPF ever or something like that.
Yeah, this one has been in the FTF world in our recommendations and stuff since near the beginning. So, no, he's very much in the sphere of all these authors that I find super interesting and haven't really quite gone into. And so I would love to see, like, to me, it's like the next generation after Brandon Sanderson, right? What that is like, what that could be, and I'm very interested to give that a chance. So, fantastic pick, and it's hard to think that that's already 10 years old now. It's so kind of crazy. That to me still feels like new age stuff, but it's a decade old.
For sure, and he's kept writing in this in this world, and I will say too, Charles, just a couple things. For me, this is a trilogy where I did enjoy the first book the most. Other books, 2 books, still strong. Ending of the series is good, but for me, it just didn't hold up to the awesomeness of Promise of Blood. But I haven't really seen that as a common opinion per se. If you look, both successive books in the series, 2 and 3, have a 4.36 rating on Goodreads compared to Promise of Blood's 4.14, which of course there is kind of just the general sequels end up with higher ratings because you got out a lot of the people in the first round of reading the book where they don't end up reading the second or third if they really didn't like it or whatever. So that's a general trend. I wouldn't say that means that people like the second and third book more per se, but does not indicate that they liked it less either. Seems like most readers don't necessarily share my sentiments, but I wanted to put that out there because I'm locking into the trilogy. It's a full series, tell the story, but that's where I come from. First book is the strongest of the 3. Anyway, just I'll close out this pitch. We've got gods walking the earth, alongside sorcerers shooting fireballs, alongside people snorting a drug to people magically bend bullets and blow up gunpowder. This is a wholly unique series that's got just about everything you could ask for and more. The action, pacing, and grittiness all make the Powder Mage trilogy a series that I feel confident is a Charles series. You're bound to enjoy it, but will you pick it? Only time can tell.
But will I pick it? That's a fantastic question, Dylan, and we won't know today.
No.
I can tell you that, they're all very, very strong. Great picks. All books I've wanted to read for a long time. Well, The Fourth Wing was only a couple days
since Thursday.
I've heard of it. But, all books that I've wanted to read. And can't go wrong with any of them. It's up to the folks at home to help me kind of try and sway my opinion here. And I'm going to be honest with you, fans. I'm not really thinking of the fourth wing right now. And I know that's probably going to be one of the more popular ones in the polls. So just a heads up, if you really are feeling like that's something you want us to read, I need to see some like statistically significant love in the polls for the fourth wing, because I don't know, man, this back to form kind of grimdark stuff is really calling my name. But I could pick anything, you know. I'm a man of the people, and I'm curious to what they say. And there's a lot to think about with your pitches, Dylan. And honestly, I only think what we can do now is just call it a day. What do you think?
I think it's time to get that sweet outro music pumping. I mean, what more is there to do, Charles? I gave my pitches. The people know they can reach out to us on social media. We'll tell them where in a second.
We sure will.
They can vote on these. And you've heard my pitches, listeners. Yeah. What do you want?
Yep. Fantastic job with those pitches, Dylan. Fantastic selection. We've got a lot to look forward to on FTF, regardless of the choice. But in the meantime, let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Thank you all, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want to support the show, come over and talk to us on the socials or vote for one of your pitches that you want us to read, one of Dylan's pitches that you want us to read on the show. You can do that over on Instagram at the FTF Podcast, and then on X at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. I'm doing it. I'm embracing it. And there's going to be polls on both.
He's
guys.
An X guy.
I'm not an X guy. Let's put that in right now. I'm not an X guy. But I'm also
He's pro
like
Elon now.
It's not going to God, definitely not. It's not going to go back to Twitter anytime soon. So may as well just accept it and move on with my life. But the polls are going to be on both, so be sure to go vote. And Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they went and they voted and they supported us over on socials and they want to support us even further, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify. It's just 2 clicks at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast feed. It helps us so much when you do that. You can also rate and or review. Oh, didn't I say I was going to do this differently? The rate and or review thing, because you can't. All right. Anyway, well, I'll fix it before the next FPF. You can rate and or review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can actually write nice stuff about us over there. You can also write mean stuff, but please don't do that.
And on Spotify too.
You can't write stuff.
Can't you write stuff now on Spotify?
No,
I don't know.
Not that I.
Oh, maybe
Come
not.
on, Charles, you're ruining it.
I'm sorry.
I don't come in during your whole spiel. Actually, I do.
You did. You're like, oh, you're an expert now. You love Elon. Like, this literally happened like 2 seconds ago. Yours was
okay, but you said X instead of Twitter. Rate and or review on Apple Podcasts. Just toss us 5 stars. Whenever you write something nice about us, though, that puts a smile on my face. And presumably on Charles's cynical, clever, and whatever else I said, face as well. What was it? Dark sense of humor. So, this has been a mess of an ending.
What a mess, but you know what? The points got across. Thank you all so much for listening.
Just listening is more than enough.
Great. Just listening is always more than enough. Thank you so much. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.